The Great Hall of the Galactic Academy was bright and wide, with high silver walls that reached up like towers in the sky, and banners of many alien worlds hung above in colors of blue, gold, red, and green, and the voices of hundreds of alien cadets echoed through the air as they waited for the trials to begin. And in the middle of the great open floor stood a single human cadet named Eli Ward, wearing a simple black training suit with no armor, no weapon, and a strip of dark cloth tied across his eyes. Like a blindfold, the alien elites gathered in groups, speaking in their strange, deep, or high voices, some with voices like gravel, some like whistles, and others like the hum of power lines. And they stared at Eli with sharp, glowing eyes, some eyes red, some gold, some with pupils shaped like slits, and some with no pupils at all, and their faces twisted in mocking smiles, because to them a human cadet was nothing more than a curiosity, a weak little thing from a backwater world that did not belong in the Grand Hall of Champions. They spoke to each other in loud voices so Eli could hear them, saying things like Earth cadets are slow, Earth cadets are soft, Earth cadets cannot win even one trial. And some laughed so hard their long, thin bodies shook, or their scaled shoulders rattled with the sound of coins in a jar, and their laughter filled the air like a storm of sneers and insults. Near the center platform where the trials would start stood Commander Vare, a tall alien with skin like dark stone and a crown of horn-like ridges on his head, and he looked down at Eli with a smile that had no warmth at all, and he said to the hall in a deep, booming voice, "This is the Earth cadet they have sent to stand among us. This is what they call their best." And yet he hides his eyes before the trials begin. The crowd laughed again, some pounding the railings with clawed hands, others slapping the sides of their long tails against the floor, and Vare went on saying perhaps he is too afraid to see the field before him, perhaps he knows that one look at the challenges will crush his spirit, and so he covers his eyes to hide from the truth. Eli did not move, and did not speak. He stood with his arms at his sides, his feet steady, his head lifted, and his blindfold in place, as if the noise of the hall was nothing more than the wind in the trees back on Earth. And though the crowd kept laughing, their eyes could not help but keep returning to him, as if some part of them was waiting for a reaction, and yet none came. From the walls of the hall, massive gates began to grind open with the sound of heavy gears turning and chains pulling, and the first trial was revealed in shifting light. The floor of the arena beyond the gate moved like the waves of an ocean, yet made of steel and stone, and between the moving platforms were deep pits lined with coils of glowing energy that snapped and crackled like lightning in a storm, and the smell of burning metal drifted into the hall. This was the gauntlet, the first test that every cadet must pass, and even with open eyes, it was known as one of the most dangerous trials, because one wrong step, one moment of hesitation could send a cadet into the pits, where the coils would throw them back, smoking and broken, and the alien elites leaned forward to see how the human would even step onto the first moving platform. A tall insectoid cadet with arms like spears clicked his mandibles together and said he will fall in the first 10 seconds, and another alien with a wide beak and feathers like polished metal said 10 seconds is generous, I say 5, and they both laughed together in the sharp short bursts of their strange kind. Commander Vare raised one long finger, and the sound of the hall began to quiet, and his voice rolled over the crowd, saying, "Eli Ward, Earth cadet, you may remove your blindfold, if you wish, and face the trial with your eyes open." But Eli gave no answer, and made no move toward the cloth across his face, and the silence that followed seemed heavier than before, because every alien there could feel the strange tension of his choice, and in that quiet Eli took his first step forward onto the moving steel platform, without hesitation, without searching for the edge, and without the slightest stumble. Gasps rose from the nearest row of alien cadets, because they saw that his step was perfect, not close to a fall, not even uncertain, and when the platform shifted beneath him, he shifted too in a way that matched its motion exactly, as if he had known how it would move before it did, and he kept walking slowly, but with a steady rhythm toward the next platform, which slid sideways away from him, and then toward him again like a predator circling prey. With the timing of a trained soldier, he stepped across the gap, landing right in the center of the next moving slab of steel. And again his footing was perfect, as if the blindfold over his eyes was no barrier at all. And from the side of the hall, a young reptilian cadet whispered, "He can hear the machines." And another said, "No, he is guessing, and will fall soon." and yet as they spoke, Eli stepped again and again with the same perfect timing, crossing the platforms like a man walking on a steady road, instead of a floor of shifting death. The alien elites began to fall silent one by one as they watched the human move forward toward the far end of the trial with the deep pits and their lightning coils flashing beneath him, and the air grew heavy with the strange realization that the human might actually reach the end without falling even once, and yet no one wanted to say it aloud for fear of breaking the strange spell over the hall. Commander Vare leaned forward, gripping the railing before him, his ridged brow furrowed and his voice low, as he muttered, "This is no accident, this is something else," and his eyes narrowed as Eli reached the final set of platforms, which were smaller, faster, and shifted in irregular patterns designed to confuse even the best cadets who used their eyes. Eli tilted his head as if listening to something far away, and then his body moved in a blur, stepping, leaping, turning as the platform swung and slid under his feet, and the crowd could not even follow his exact path, because his movement was too smooth, too fast to be the clumsy guessing they had expected from a human, and in the blink of an eye he reached the final platform and stood there tall and calm with the blindfold still across his eyes. For a moment there was no sound in the great hall except the hum of the coils and the faint creak of the steel platforms moving in the trial field, and then the silence broke in a wave of murmurs and low voices as aliens turned to each other, speaking in disbelief, some saying it must be luck, others saying it was impossible, and still others saying that perhaps Earth cadets were not as weak as they had thought. Commander Vare's voice rose again, calling across the hall to Eli, saying this was only the first of many trials, and perhaps the next will not be. So kind to one who refuses to see. And Eli simply stood there in the center of the final platform, silent as ever, and the way he faced forward without turning his head toward the voice made the commander's words feel as if they had missed their mark. The gate to the second trial began to open with a slow, heavy sound like thunder rolling through the sky, and beyond its shadows moved against the glow of red and orange light, and the scent of hot metal and oil filled the air, and the alien elites leaned forward again, eager to see if the human could keep his strange control in a place where every corner and every path had been built to test the limits of sight itself. And though the crowd did not yet know at the moment they would stop laughing at the Earth cadet forever was now close at hand, and the path to that moment was about to begin in the shadows of the next arena. The second gate opened wider, and the light from inside spilled across the great hall in shifting shades of red and gold and shadow, and the scent of hot oil and scorched metal grew stronger with each passing moment, and the alien elites leaned forward in their seats to see the arena beyond the gate, and what they saw brought new murmurs across the crowd, for this was not a place of still ground and safe paths, but a deadly machine that never rested and never gave mercy to the unprepared. The trial was known across the academy as the Gauntlet, a place of moving steel and spinning gear teeth with deep pits between every path and walls that shifted in strange and sudden ways. The floor was made of platforms that slid back and forth at different speeds, some fast enough to throw the careless cadet straight into the pits, others slow enough to lull them into a false sense of safety, until the moment they sped forward without warning, each pit glowed with the dangerous coils of energy that spat out blue lightning like snapping jaws, and the air crackled with a low electric hum that crawled across the skin. Every cadet in the academy had faced the gauntlet in their first year, but very few had reached the end without a fall, and most needed their eyes wide open just to keep track of the platforms ahead. Yet here stood Eli Ward with his blindfold still across his face, his hands still loose at his sides, his body unmoving, as if he was listening to something far away, and the alien elites watched with open doubt, certain that whatever luck had carried him through the first steps of the earlier arena would now run out. Commander Vare raised one clawed hand for silence, his voice carrying across the hall like a deep drumbeat, and he called out to the human, saying, "Step forward, Earth cadet, and show us whether you can walk this path without seeing it." And there was a hint of challenge in his tone, the kind that dared Eli to fail in front of every eye in the room. Eli tilted his head slightly, but gave no words in reply, and his first step forward was as steady as if he were walking down a quiet street. Back on Earth, the platform beneath his boots shifted the instant his weight touched it, sliding to the left with a low grinding sound, yet Eli adjusted without pause, and took the next step before the motion had even stopped his body moving with a calm rhythm that seemed to match the strange song of the machines. Around him, from the upper rows of the hall, a young winged alien with feathers of silver leaned toward a scaled companion and whispered he is feeling the motion somehow, and the scaled alien hissed back, "Impossible, no one can match the gauntlet," without looking, and they both fell silent as Eli reached the first gap between platforms. The platform on the other side was narrow and jerked back and forth at uneven intervals. It was the kind of trap that made even the best cadets pause to time their jump, yet Eli crouched slightly and then sprang forward, landing with the soft thud of boots on steel. His feet, finding the very center without the faintest slip. The crowd let out a short wave of surprised voices, but Eli was already moving again. The gauntlet seemed almost alive, reacting to his presence by shifting faster in some places and sending sudden bursts of steam from vents along the walls. But Eli treated each change as if he had known it would happen before it did. His head turned slightly at the hiss of a vent before the steam erupted. His feet shifted left before a panel beneath him tilted down. His body bent low under a swinging steel arm without even touching it, and the alien elites began to trade uneasy glances. At the midpoint of the trial, the platforms narrowed into thin beams that wobbled under the weight of each step. Most cadets crossed here with their arms wide for balance, their eyes locked on the far end, but Eli walked forward without hesitation, his arms still close to his body, as if the movement of the beam under his feet told him everything he needed to know about where to place his next step. The crowd was silent now, watching the human with the strange mix of disbelief and fascination that comes when something impossible is happening right in front of them. Commander Veer's expression had tightened, his ridged brow casting deep shadows over his eyes, and his claws tapped slowly against the railing. He leaned forward and spoke low to the officer beside him, saying, "I do not believe this is luck." And the officer, a tall, thin being with glowing blue veins, said, "Then what is it?" And Veer gave no answer, his eyes fixed on the human, who was now nearing the final section of the gauntlet. The last section was made to break the will of those who reached it. The platforms here were not only narrow, but also moved in different directions, each one at a different speed, with pits of deeper coils below that sent bursts of lightning upward at random intervals. The walls on either side slid inward and outward in patterns designed to push cadets toward the edges, and the final jump was longer than any before, just far enough to force a leap that required perfect timing and full strength. Eli paused for the first time since entering the trial, standing at the edge of the second to last platform. His head turned slightly, as if listening. His chest rose and fell slowly as the machinery around him shifted, hissed, and roared. And then in a single smooth motion, he stepped forward 3 quick paces and leapt across the final gap, landing with both feet on the last platform, just as a burst of lightning shot up through the space he had crossed the moment before. A sound like wind rushing through the hall rose from the crowd as the alien elites let out their voices, not in laughter now, but in shouts and cries of shock, some still trying to convince themselves it was all chance, some beginning to suspect it was something else entirely. The young cadets in the lower rows stared wide-eyed, their earlier sneers gone, replaced with the kind of respect that comes when a challenge they fear is beaten with ease. Commander Veer straightened slowly, his expression unreadable as he spoke aloud, saying, "Earth Cadet, you have walked the gauntlet without sight and without fault, but the trials do not end here, and perhaps the next will show us your limits." Eli turned his head toward the sound of the voice, but said nothing, and the way he stood still and calm on the final platform made it clear that he did not see these trials as a threat, but as a simple path to walk. From the far end of the arena, another set of gates began to rise, the sound of gears grinding against one another filling the hall, and from within came the metallic clang of something heavy shifting. The light inside was dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved like living things across the walls. The air carried a sharp smell of oil and bloodless cold metal, and the alien elites leaned forward again, eager to see what came next, because the second trial was known to be cruel even to the strongest of their own kind. It was the labyrinth of blades, a twisting maze of narrow passages filled with spinning edges and swinging hammers, with shifting floors and walls that could crush anything between them. It was a place where sight was the only shield against death, where every sound echoed from 100 angles, and every shadow looked like an enemy. And to face it blindfolded was to walk willingly into the jaws of a machine built to destroy. The crowd began to murmur again, this time with a tone of hungry anticipation, for the gauntlet was a warm-up compared to what waited inside the maze, and even those who had begun to respect the human believed this would be where his strange control would finally break. The commander's gaze never left Eli, as he spoke in a low voice that still carried across the hall, saying, "Step forward into the maze if you dare." Eli adjusted the fit of the blindfold with one quick motion of his hands, then began to walk toward the open gates, his steps slow but sure, his head tilting slightly as if the sound of the spinning blades within was calling to him like the rhythm of a distant drum. And as he crossed the threshold into the shadowed maze, the crowd fell silent, once more knowing that what they were about to see could either destroy the human's legend before it began or make it grow into something the entire galaxy would remember. And in that silence, the only sound was the slow metallic thump of the gates, closing behind him, sealing him inside the labyrinth of blades, and leaving the alien elites to wonder whether they had just watched the first step of his fall or the first step into a legend they could never match. Inside the labyrinth of blades, the air was cold and sharp with the smell of metal and oil, and the faint sting of scorched air from the spinning edges that waited somewhere in the darkness, and the sound was never still, for the maze was alive with the hum and whir of machines, the deep thump of hammers swinging on hidden arms, the quick hiss of sliding walls, and the shriek of blades cutting through the empty air. The floor under Eli's boots was made of uneven plates, some steady, some trembling, as if ready to shift at the slightest weight. The light inside was dim and came from narrow strips along the walls, glowing in pale blue and red, but Eli could not see any of it through the dark cloth of the blindfold, and yet he stepped forward with the same steady rhythm he had used in the gauntlet, his head turning slightly from side to side, as if the echoes of the blades were giving him a map in his mind. The first corner came with the sharp whine of a blade spinning across the passageway, and Eli stopped for only half a breath before stepping through, just as the edge passed inches from his chest. From the viewing platform above the maze, the alien elites leaned forward to watch. On the screens that showed the inside from hidden lenses, the insectoid cadet from earlier clicked his mandibles in disbelief, saying this should be impossible even with sight, and the winged cadet beside him said maybe he has memorized the pattern, and the insectoid hissed, "No, the labyrinth changes every time." Eli's boots scraped softly against the metal floor as he moved deeper into the twisting passages, each one narrower than the last, and the machines around him seemed to grow louder, as if they sensed the intruder who could not be fooled by the tricks of sight. A hammer swung down from the ceiling, without warning, its shadow stretching long along the wall, before the heavy head struck the floor with a crash that sent vibrations through the ground. Eli's left hand brushed the wall, and in that instant he stepped back, letting the hammer fall in front of him before moving forward into the space it left behind. Commander Vare stood with his arms crossed, his ridged brow furrowed as he watched the human navigate the maze, his eyes narrow and unblinking. He had seen champions of 100 worlds face the labyrinth and fail, their bodies carried out by medics or worse, but none of them had dared to try it without sight. The commander spoke in a low voice to the officer beside him, saying, "There is no luck here," and the officer nodded his thin, glowing head. Far below in the maze, Eli came to a section where the floor shifted under his weight, tilting left. Then, right with each step ahead of him, came the steady, rising whine of a cluster of spinning blades, and the air from them carried a thin spray of oil that landed cool on his skin. His head tilted slightly, and he moved forward, not quickly, but with precision, stepping over the lowest blade, bending beneath the next, ducking to one knee as a horizontal edge swept through the space above his head, and rising again to slip through the gap between two spinning wheels without touching either. The alien elites began to murmur, not with laughter now, but with the uneasy sound of those who were seeing their certainty break. The young cadets in the front row whispered to each other, asking if humans trained in darkness, if perhaps their small blue world was a place of constant danger, and Eli moved on, as if unaware of their words. The maze grew more dangerous as he went on walls, sliding toward each other with a grinding roar only to pull back again in patterns meant to crush the unwary. Eli pressed his palm to one wall and stepped forward in rhythm, with its movement slipping through the gap just as the walls slammed shut behind him, the clang echoing like a great bell. His breathing was slow, and even each breath matched to the sound around him. At the midpoint of the labyrinth, a wide chamber opened with multiple exits, and in the center hung a ring of spinning blades, suspended from above by chains that swayed as the machines moved, each blade angled to cut at a different height, some low near the floor, some high, at chest level, and others at the height of a head. The exits beyond were blocked by shifting steel bars that opened and closed in uneven patterns, and the air here was hot and filled with the metallic tang of the machines. Eli stepped into the ring of blades, moving with the flow of their motion, not fighting at his shoulders, turning to let one pass close enough to stir the air against his skin, his knees bending, as another cut low across the space where his legs had been a moment before. The chains above clinked and swayed, and the sound told him the timing of the next swing. He passed through, without a scratch, his boots ringing lightly on the steel floor as he moved toward the far exit. From the upper platform, the crowd could see the machines shifting in his path, yet Eli seemed to move before they did, as if the maze was not testing him, but dancing with him. The commander's claws drummed once against the railing, his expression still unreadable, and when Eli reached the last blade and slipped through just as the bars opened, the crowd released a breath they did not realize they had been holding. The next section was a corridor that narrowed until it was barely wide enough for a person to pass, and from above sharp panels dropped down, without warning, each one fast enough to slice through armor. Eli paused at the entrance, tilting his head as the panels slammed down one after another in a staggered rhythm. He stepped in, moving only when the sound of a panel rising told him it was safe. His hands brushing the walls for balance, the panels came down close enough to ruffle his hair through the blindfold, and still he did not flinch. The end of the corridor opened into a spiral path that wound upward around a central shaft. The walls here were lined with small vents that hissed bursts of hot air strong enough to push a cadet off balance. The floor panels shifted in direction with each step. Eli slowed here, his feet testing each panel before committing his weight, his body leaning into the bursts of air so they could not push him aside, and the alien elites watched in silence. At the top of the spiral, the final stretch of the labyrinth awaited, a straight path lined on both sides with spinning discs that moved in and out from the walls at chest height. The gap between them was barely wider than a person, and the discs spun with such speed that they blurred into rings of silver. Even the best cadets timed their runs carefully here. Eli waited for only a single breath, then moved forward at a steady pace, slipping between the first pair, then the next, each one passing so close it brushed the edge of his training suit. The rhythm of his steps matched to the machines, as if he had walked this path 100 times before. When he reached the end, the exit gates slid upward with a hiss of steam, and Eli stepped through into the light of the great hall. The crowd erupted not with laughter, but with shouts and murmurs of disbelief. The commander's voice carried over them, saying, "The human passes the labyrinth of blades, and still he does not see." Eli stood just beyond the gate, his blindfold still in place, his breathing steady, as if he had done nothing more than walk across a field back on his home world. The commander's eyes narrowed as he spoke again, saying, "The next trial will break this pattern, Earth cadet, for no one can cross the trial of gravity blind," and remained standing. Eli gave no answer, only turned his head toward the sound of the opening gate on the far side of the hall, where a strange weightless shimmer began to spill out into the air. The alien elites leaned forward again, sensing that what came next would push the human beyond the edge or raise him higher than they could imagine. And in the quiet before the trial began, the only sound was the low hum of the gravity engines deep below the floor. The great hall seemed to bend under the strange shimmer spilling from the far gate. As the trial of gravity revealed itself, the air grew heavy, then light, then heavy again, in strange waves that rolled across the floor, making the banners high above sway in a rhythm that did not match the breath of any wind. The alien elites leaned forward in their seats, their eyes glowing with the anticipation of seeing the human cadet fail, for this trial was feared even among their strongest warriors. Beyond the gate, the arena was nothing like the gauntlet or the labyrinth here. There were no walls to hold to, no steady ground beneath the feet. The floor was gone, replaced by a wide, open chamber filled with floating platforms of stone and steel, some round, some jagged, some small as a shield, and others wide as a ship's deck. Each one drifted in its own path across the open space, turning sometimes, rising sometimes, falling. The air shimmered in places where the pull of gravity shifted without warning, sending the platforms into sudden bursts of motion or slowing them until they hung in stillness like pieces of the sky frozen in place. From the viewing platforms above, the alien elites could see the faint lines of energy fields that ran between some of the platforms, pulling them together or pushing them apart. But inside the arena, those lines were invisible to the naked eye, even to the sharp vision of alien champions, and without sight, they would be impossible to predict, or so they believed. Commander Vare rested his clawed hands on the railing, his gaze fixed on Eli Ward as he stepped forward to the edge of the chamber, the blindfold still tied firm across his eyes. A voice from the crowd called out in a mocking tone, "Let us see if you can walk on air, blind one." And another shouted, "The first step will be your last." And the sound of cruel laughter rippled through the higher rows, yet those closest to the front did not laugh. They remembered the gauntlet and the labyrinth and the way the human had walked through danger, as if the paths had been marked for him alone. Eli stood at the edge, his boots planted firm on the last solid floor before the floating platforms, and for a long breath he was still, as if he were listening to the hum of the gravity engines deep below. Then, with a step as calm as his first in the gauntlet, he moved forward and leapt to the nearest platform, landing without a stagger. The platform itself drifted slightly under his weight, then steadied as the air shifted again. From above, the alien elites could see that the platform Eli stood on was beginning to rise, drawn upward toward a zone where the pull of gravity reversed and would fling him upward into the ceiling spikes unless he leapt away. But Eli moved before the rise became dangerous, pushing off into the open air toward a smaller platform that slid across from the side. His hands did not reach for balance. His feet found the center as if guided by an unseen line, and he bent his knees just enough to absorb the motion as the platform jerked sideways. Commander Vare's eyes narrowed, and his claws tapped once against the railing. For in his own training, he knew that the key to this trial was reading the tiny signals in the body and the air, the subtle changes in pressure and weight, and yet the human seemed to read them without hesitation. A sudden shift rolled through the chamber, a wave of reverse gravity that sent 3 platforms tumbling downward toward the open void. Eli crouched low and leapt sideways, landing on a broad slab of stone that was drifting slowly upward toward a set of smaller platforms. Ahead, the crowd gasped, for the leap had been long, and the timing perfect, placing him exactly where he needed to be before the smaller platforms began to move apart. The alien elites began to murmur again, some in disbelief, others in grudging respect, and a few in fear that what they were seeing meant the human could not be stopped. A heavy-winged warrior in the third row spoke to his companion, saying, "The air speaks to him," and the companion replied, "Or the ground, or the void, whatever it is, it obeys him." Eli moved forward again, stepping from one platform to another, each one shifting in unpredictable arcs across the space below him. The shimmer of gravity zones flickered in the air, but he did not look to see them. Instead, he seemed to feel them in the way the air pulled at his body, in the way the platform beneath him tilted or slowed. He stepped clear of sudden upward surge just before it would have launched him into a spike field above, then turned sharply left to catch a narrow ledge that only appeared from behind another drifting mass of steel. Halfway through the trial, the platforms grew smaller, and the spaces between them wider. Some were too far for a normal jump, requiring a leap made at the exact moment 2 platforms passed close enough to reach. Eli waited at the edge of one such gap, his head tilted to the side, as if listening for something. The platform beneath him shifted forward, and then just as it slowed, he leapt his boots, striking the far platform in the instant before it began to drift away again. From the crowd came a low sound, not laughter this time, but offer the leap had been near impossible, even for a sighted cadet. The commander's gaze sharpened as he said in a low voice to the officer beside him, "If he passes this trial, I will face him myself," and the officer only nodded. The final stretch of the trial of gravity was the most dangerous. The platforms here moved in spirals around each other, some rising, some falling, and the gravity zones between them flickered so fast that even the alien elites could not track their patterns from above. Eli moved with the same calm pace he had kept since the start, his body turning and twisting through the air as he leapt from one spiraling platform to another, the shimmer of the zones brushing against him without pulling him in, as if he had chosen the only path where they could not touch him. When he reached the last platform, the crowd broke into a storm of voices, some shouting in anger at the impossibility of it, others cheering in spite of themselves. Commander Vare raised a hand, and the voices fell away, his deep voice rolling across the hall as he said, "The human cadet has crossed the trial of gravity blind and without falling, but the next challenge will not be one of machines. It will be one of will and strength, and it will be faced against me." The crowd erupted at those words, for it was rare for the commander himself to enter the trials, and rarer still for him to do so against a cadet. He turned from the railing and made his way down to the arena floor, his long steps echoing across the chamber as Eli stood waiting on the final platform, the blindfold still in place. The gate to the next arena began to open, its lights spilling out in pale silver, and the air inside was still and heavy. The space was empty save for the smooth metal floor and the tall, dark figure of Commander Vare stepping inside, his plasma staff in hand, the hum of its power low but deadly. The alien elites fell silent, for they knew that this duel would decide more than the trials. It would decide whether the human's defiance was skill or luck, whether he was a threat or a fool. Eli stepped forward into the duel chamber, the sound of his boots soft against the smooth metal, and the gates closed behind him, sealing the two of them inside. The commander raised his staff, and the hum grew louder, and the air seemed to tighten around them. And in that moment, every eye in the great hall was fixed on the blindfolded human who stood across from one of the galaxy's most feared warriors. The chamber was silent, except for the steady hum of Commander Vare's plasma staff, and the slow, calm breathing of Eli ward. The smooth floor gleamed under the silver light that spilled from above, making the shadows stretch long and thin across the empty space. The alien elites leaned forward in their seats, as if their eyes could pierce through the air and touch the moment before it began. For this was not a trial of machines or traps. This was a test of skill and will, and both warriors knew it. Commander Vare took one slow step forward, his tall frame moving with the grace of a predator, his eyes locked on the blindfolded human before him. His voice was low and steady as he spoke. "You have walked through danger without sight, human, but now you face me, and here your calm steps will not save you, for I will strike where you do not expect." Eli tilted his head as if listening to the sound of the commander's steps, his hands loose at his sides, the tension in his shoulders light but ready, like a bowstring waiting to be drawn. Without warning, the commander moved his staff, cutting through the air in a blur of silver light, the hum rising to a sharp hiss as the weapon passed where Eli had been standing a moment before. The human had stepped sideways with a small shift of his weight, letting the strike pass so close the heat of it brushed against his arm. The alien elites murmured in surprise, for the strike had been fast and precise, yet the human had moved at the exact moment needed to avoid it. Vare turned the movement flowing into a second strike, this one low, aiming for the legs. Eli leapt back, the tip of the plasma staff passing just in front of his boots. He landed light and moved again to the side, his steps circling the commander, keeping a careful distance. The blindfold remained in place, yet his movements were sharp and sure, as if he could see the weapon coming before it was swung again. The commander's eyes narrowed, his strikes came faster, now high, then low, then high again. The air filled with the hum and hiss of the plasma edge. Eli's body twisted and bent with each pass, sometimes leaning away at the last instant, sometimes ducking under the strike, his breathing never quickening, his face calm, as if the duel were nothing more than a slow dance. From the viewing platforms, whispers began to spread, one alien saying he is not guessing where the strikes will fall, he knows, and another answering, "It is not possible, no one knows the commander strikes before they come." Vare heard the whispers, but his focus did not break. He pressed forward, driving Eli back across the chamber toward the far wall, his strikes heavy enough to send shock waves through the air, the floor humming under the force of each blow. Eli stepped back until his heel touched the wall, then he pushed forward, slipping past the next strike. So close the heat grazed his cheek, his shoulder brushing against the commander as he passed behind him, turning on his heel to face him again. The move was so quick and smooth the alien elites gasped for it. It was the kind of maneuver only a fighter with perfect awareness could make. Ver spun his staff in one hand, the silver light blurring in a circle, as he said, "You fight without fear, human, but fear is what keeps the living alive. Without it, you will fall." Eli's head tilted again, his voice calm. "And even fear is what blinds the living, commander. I see more without it." The next exchange came faster, the staff striking high, then low, then spinning to sweep across the middle. Eli moved in time with each attack, his steps precise, his body always in the one place. The weapon was not once he reached for the staff itself, his fingers brushing the humming edge before pulling back the crowd. Holding its breath at the danger of that touch, Ver's strikes grew heavier, the hum of the staff loud enough to echo off the walls, yet each one met only empty air as the human turned or shifted just enough to avoid it. Then the commander changed his pace, his body suddenly still, his staff held low, as if waiting for the human to make the first move. Eli stood across from him, unmoving, the silence heavy between them. The alien elites leaned forward, expecting a strike to come, but it did not. Instead, the commander began to circle, his steps slow and careful, his eyes fixed on Eli's chest, reading the small movements of his breath, the way his weight shifted on his feet. Eli began to circle, too, matching the pace of the commander, the two warriors moving in a slow spiral toward the center of the chamber. Then, without warning, they both moved at once, the commander's staff striking forward as Eli stepped into the attack, his hand closing around the middle of the weapon, just below the humming blade, his body twisting to pull it aside. The plasma edge passed inches from his side as he pushed forward, closing the space between them. The commander reacted quickly, pulling the staff back and swinging low, but Eli was already moving his hand, sliding along the shaft to push it higher, the hum growing louder as the weapon resisted. Then, with a sharp twist, he forced the staff down and stepped in close. The two locked together in a test of strength, the silver light of the weapon casting sharp shadows across their faces. The alien elites shouted in excitement, the sound rising through the chamber. With a burst of strength, the commander forced Eli back, breaking the lock and swinging the staff in a wide arc. Eli dropped to one knee, the weapon passing over his head. Then he rolled forward under the next strike, coming up on the other side of the commander, his hand brushing against the alien's arm as he passed, the movement so smooth it looked almost effortless. Ver turned quickly, bringing the staff down in a vertical strike, the hum high and dangerous, but Eli stepped aside, letting the weapon strike the floor, the impact sending a small tremor through the chamber before the commander pulled it free. The two faced each other again, breathing steady, their steps measured. The duel had become not just a fight of strength or speed, but of patience and control, each waiting for the other to make the mistake that would end it. The crowd was silent, now, in no laughter, no mockery, only the low hum of the staff and the soft sound of boots against the floor. Then the commander moved one last time, a strike aimed straight for the human's chest, quick and certain, but Eli turned with it, his hand catching the staff near the base, his other hand pressing against the commander's shoulder, using the alien's own movement to pull him forward and off balance. The commander staggered one step, enough for Eli to twist the staff away and send it clattering across the floor, the hum fading into silence. The alien elites rose to their feet, some shouting in shock, others in admiration. The commander straightened his chest, rising as he looked at the human, who stood with the staff in his hand, still blindfolded. His voice carried across the chamber as he said, "The trials are done, but the war has not yet begun, and in that war you will be tested beyond this." Eli lowered the staff, setting it gently on the floor, then turned toward the sound of the gate as it opened, the light spilling through, revealing the path to the next challenge. The commander watched him go, a small spark of respect in his eyes, though his voice remained cold as he spoke to the officers near him, "Prepare the final trial for this. One has not yet been broken." Eli stepped into the light, his calm steps carrying him toward the unknown, the sound of the gate closing behind him echoing in the silence as the alien elites whispered among themselves, wondering if any trial could bring him down. The gate closed behind Eli with a deep echo that rolled through the corridor like distant thunder. The air was cooler here, and smelled faintly of metal, and ozone. The walls were made of dark alloy that seemed to swallow the light. As he walked forward, his boots made a soft hollow sound on the floor, the blindfold still wrapped around his eyes, but his step steady, as if he already knew the way ahead. The corridor curved left, then right, then opened into a vast chamber that felt different from the others he had faced before. The space was circular and high, the walls lined with strange panels that pulsed faintly like the slow heartbeat of a living thing. The ceiling was hidden in shadow, but Eli could sense movement above, as if something watched from the dark unseen. A voice spoke not from a single point, but from every surface around him, deep and layered, like many speaking at once. Welcome, human. You have passed the trials of strength, speed, and skill, but the final trial is not one of the body alone. This is the trial of the void. And in the void there is no ground, no sound, no light, only the self and the truth within. Eli stood still, listening, his breathing slow. The voice continued, you will face what you are and what you fear, and if you fall, the galaxy will know. You are not worthy to stand among the stars. The floor beneath him shifted without warning, the panels sliding apart to reveal empty darkness below. He stepped forward and found no surface to meet his foot, yet he did not fall. Instead, he felt himself lifted weightless in the air. The air around him vanished into silence, so complete he could not even hear his own breath. The blindfold was meaningless now, for even without it, there would have been nothing to see. In this weightless silence, something began to press at the edges of his mind. Not a sound, not a touch, but a presence. It whispered without words, a pull toward old memories. The scent of earth reigned, the sound of a drill sergeant barking orders, the laughter of his fellow cadets, the bitter taste of defeat in a training match years ago. And beneath it all, the deep, quiet fear that perhaps the alien elites had been right, that perhaps the humans were weaker, slower, less advanced than the others. The presence pushed harder, shaping itself into visions. Though his eyes saw nothing, he felt them, as if they were real. A battlefield where humans lay broken under alien fire, a sky filled with ships burning as they fell to the surface, the voices of his comrades calling for help that never came, his own hands empty, unable to save them, the weight of failure crushing down on him until his breath grew short. Eli knew it was the void testing him, feeding on the doubts and fears buried deep within. Yet knowing was not enough. The images came faster, sharper, the laughter of alien officers as they spoke of Earth cadets, as children playing at war, the faces of his instructors shaking their heads, saying he would never be more than average, the sound of his own voice, once saying, maybe they are right. The pressure grew, and the weightless chamber seemed to twist around him, as if the darkness itself wanted to swallow him whole. He focused on his breathing, slow and steady, each inhale like an anchor in the void. He remembered the first day he stepped into the academy yard, the rough gravel under his boots, the warmth of the sun on his face, the quiet promise he made to himself that no matter what the galaxy thought, he would prove them wrong, not for their respect, but for the truth of what he could be. The visions shifted, the burning ships faded, the broken battlefield gone, and now he stood in another memory, a small training room with padded walls, a young alien cadet standing across from him, smirking as if the fight ahead was already won. He remembered the feel of the mat under his feet, the sound of the match starting, and the sharp clarity of the moment when he found the rhythm of the fight, when he realized he could see every movement before it came. The void pushed again, but this time he did not move. The fear was there, yes, but it could not take root, for he had walked through it before. He let the memories pass through him like water around stone. The voice returned, though softer. Now you hold to yourself, human, but the void is endless, and all who enter are lost in the end. Eli answered with a voice steady as rock, then I will be the first who is not lost and the last who lets go. Light began to grow around him, faint at first like the glow of stars far away, then brighter until it filled the chamber. Though his blindfold remained in place, he could feel the space changing, the weightless drift giving way to solid ground. Beneath his boots, the silence breaking as air returned to his ears, carrying the sound of distant engines and the low hum of energy. The chamber was not empty now, though he could not see them. He could sense shapes around him, moving in a slow circle, their presence heavy and deliberate. The voice spoke again, the void is done, but the trial remains. These are the keepers of the gate, and they guard the path beyond. The final trial is to pass between them untouched. Eli shifted his stance to the ground beneath him, smooth and cold, the air thick with the faint scent of ozone. He took a step forward and felt the air stir as something moved close to his side, fast and silent. He turned just enough for it to pass by his arm, the movement quick and precise like the strike of a predator. Then another shape moved in from the opposite side, and he stepped back, letting it sweep past. The keepers moved without sound and without pattern. Each step Eli took brought another attack from a different angle. Yet he moved through them, as he had in every trial before, listening to the faint currents of air, the shift of weight in the ground, the smallest changes that told him where the strike would come next. One by one the movements passed him by until the air grew still again. The voice returned, softer now. The path is open, human, go, and take what you have earned. Eli stepped forward through the space where the keepers had stood, the air parting around him like the calm after a storm ahead. He felt the gate open, the light warm against his face, the hum of distant voices waiting beyond the trial. He walked into that light, his boots ringing once against the threshold before the gate closed behind him, the sound deep and final, the trial of the void complete. Though what lay ahead was still unknown, the alien elites beyond watched in silence, some with disbelief, others with growing respect for the blindfolded human who had walked through every trial and had not fallen once. Eli stepped out from the gate into a vast hall lit by towering crystal pillars that glowed with a soft white light. The air was filled with the quiet hum of unseen machinery and the faint murmur of countless alien voices that fell to silence the instant they saw him. Rows upon rows of alien elites stood in their ceremonial armor, their colors and patterns marking them as champions of their own worlds, each one a figure of power and pride. Yet every gaze was fixed on the human cadet who walked forward, blindfolded, his steps steady, his head high. In the center of the hall, a long dais rose from the floor, its surface engraved with the symbols of the Galactic Academy, and at the far end stood the High Council of the Academy, 11 figures representing the mightiest civilizations of known space, their presence heavy as the weight of worlds. The one at the center, a tall being draped in flowing silver cloth, raised a hand, and the silence deepened like a held breath. "You have passed the trials," the figure said, the voice deep and calm. "You have walked through fire and shadow and void, and you have not fallen. You have stood where many of our own have failed, and you have done so with your eyes closed. Tell us, human, why did you choose to face the trials this way?" Eli stood still for a long moment, his mind as calm as a still lake. Then he spoke, his voice carrying clearly to the edges of the hall. "Because you believe that Earth's cadets were nothing but noise and weakness, because you believe that our victories were luck and our failures proof of our place at the bottom, I chose to face the trials blind, so that when I stood here at the end, no one could say it was because I saw more or knew more than any other. I wanted you to know it was not sight that guided me, but skill and will alone." A ripple moved through the crowd, a shifting of feet, a low murmur of voices quickly silenced. The silver-robed figure tilted their head, as if weighing his words, then gestured toward a stand at the side of the dais. A keeper stepped forward, holding a blade unlike any other, its edge thin and bright, its hilt marked with runes of victory. "This is the sword of the first. It is given to the champion who surpasses all others in the trials. Take it and be named Champion of the Academy." Eli stepped forward and took the blade, its weight solid in his hands. Though he could not see it, he could feel the warmth of the metal, as if it carried the heat of countless battles. When a sound rose from the hall, not a cheer at first, but a low rumble that grew and swelled, until it filled the air with a force that seemed to shake the crystal pillars themselves. It was the sound of warriors and leaders from every corner of the galaxy, honoring the one who had earned his place among them. But not all voices joined in. From the far end of the hall, a sharp cry cut through the noise, and a tall alien with armor of deep crimson stepped forward, his eyes narrow, his movement sharp as a blade. "This is a mockery," he said. "This human may have passed the trials, but they do not prove he can stand in battle against the true champions of the galaxy. I challenge him here and now." The hall fell silent. Once more the silver-robed figure turned to Eli and asked, "Do you accept?" Eli tilted his head slightly and answered yes. The crimson-armored challenger stepped into the center of the hall, the floor shifting and flattening beneath them until it became a smooth ring wide enough for combatants to move freely. Eli adjusted his grip on the sword of the first, feeling the faint hum of energy within the metal, the blindfold still tied firmly across his eyes, the crowd around them silent as the air before a storm. The first strike came fast, the challenger's weapon cutting through the air with a sound like tearing cloth, but Eli had already moved, stepping aside, letting the strike pass close enough that he could feel the heat of the energy edge. He heard the shift of weight, the sound of breath, the faint scrape of a boot turning on the floor. The second strike came lower, but he blocked it with a swift turn of his wrist, the clash ringing like a bell through the hall. The challenger pressed harder, each strike faster than the last, his movements fueled by anger and pride. Yet Eli met each one with calm precision, his feet steady as breath, even his sword moving as if it were part of him. The sound of the fight filled the chamber, metal on metal, the rush of air, the soft thud of boots finding new ground, each block and countermeasured and sure. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours to those watching. The challenger grew faster, more desperate, his attacks wild, but still deadly. Eli stepped inside the arc of one swing, turning the blade aside and bringing the hilt of his sword against the challenger's chest. The impact sent him back a step. The crowd gasped. The crimson-armored alien steadied himself and came forward again, but now his strikes lacked the same certainty. Eli moved with quiet grace, each motion flowing into the next, until at last the opening came. With a single shift of weight and a turn of the wrist, Eli disarmed his opponent, the crimson weapon clattering to the floor, the sound loud in the sudden silence. Eli held his blade still pointed at the challenger's chest, but did not strike. The crowd watched as he stepped back, lowering the sword and letting the challenger reclaim his weapon with a slow bow of respect. The silver-robed figure raised their voice, so all could hear. The trials are ended. The challenge is ended. The champion stands and will not be moved from his place. Let the galaxy know that Earth has produced a warrior of unmatched skill and will, and let none speak again of weakness in their blood. The roar that followed shook the air, the sound of thousands acknowledging what they had seen. Eli stood still in the center of it all, the blindfold still in place, the sword of the first in his hand, the weight of the moment sinking. And he had not come here for the roar or the honor, but he knew that Earth would feel the change from this day forward. No longer the world whispered about in doubt, but the world spoken of in respect. As the hall settled, the High Council stepped down from the dais, each one offering a gesture of respect in their own way, some with a bow, others with a touch of their hands to their chest. The silver-robed leader paused before Eli and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. You have changed more than you know. Human, the galaxy will not forget this day. Eli only nodded. The blindfold still tied the warmth of the sword in his hands, a steady reminder of the path he had walked and the trials he had faced. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more doubts to shatter, but for now he stood in the light of victory and the quiet knowledge that he had done what he set out to do.